Now Samuel died, and all Israel assembled and mourned for him, and they buried him at his home in Ramah. Then David moved down into the desert of Paran. A certain man in Maon, who had property there at Carmel, was very wealthy. He had 1,000 goats and 3,000 sheep, which he was shearing in Carmel. His name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. She was an intelligent and beautiful woman, and her husband was surly and mean in his dealings. He was a Calebite. While David was in the wilderness, he heard that Nabal was shearing sheep. So he sent 10 young men and said to them, "Go up to Nabal at Carmel and greet him in my name. Say to him, 'Long life to you, good health to you and your household, and good health to all that is yours.' Now I hear that it is sheep shearing time. When your shepherds were with us, we did not mistreat them, and the whole time they were at Carmel, nothing of theirs was missing. Ask your own servants, and they will tell you. Therefore, be favourable towards my men, since we came at a festive time. Please give your servants and your son David whatever you can find for them." When David's men arrived, they gave Nabal this message in David's name. Then they waited. Nabal answered David's servants, "Who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse? Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days. Why should I take my bread and water and the meat I have slaughtered for my shearers and give it to men coming from who knows where?" David's men turned around and went back. When they arrived, they reported every word. David said to his men, "Each of you strap on your sword." So they did, and David strapped his on as well. About 400 men went up with David, while 200 stayed with the supplies. One of the servants told Abigail, Nabal's wife, "David sent messengers from the wilderness to give our master his greetings, but he hurled insults at them. Yet these men were very good to us. They did not mistreat us, and the whole time we were out in the fields near them, nothing was missing. Night and day they were a wall around us the whole time we were herding our sheep near them. Now think it over and see what you can do, because disaster is hanging over our master and his whole household. He is such a wicked man that no one can talk to him." Abigail acted quickly. She took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep, 5 seahs of roasted grain, 100 cakes of raisins, and 200 cakes of pressed figs, and loaded them on donkeys. Then she told her servants, "Go on ahead, I'll follow you." But she did not tell her husband Nabal. As she came riding her donkey into a mountain ravine, there were David and his men descending towards her, and she met them. David had just said, "It's been useless, all my watching over this fellow's property in the wilderness, so that nothing of his was missing. He has paid me back evil for good. May God deal with David, be it so ever so severely, if by morning I leave alive one man of all who belong to him." When Abigail saw David, she quickly got off her donkey and bowed down before David with her face to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, "Pardon your servant, my lord, and let me speak to you. Hear what your servant has to say. Please pay no attention, my lord, to that wicked man Nabal. He is just like his name. His name means fool, and folly goes with him. And as for me, your servant, I did not see the men who my lord sent. And now, my lord, as surely as the Lord your God lives, and as you live, since the Lord has kept you from bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hands, may your enemies and all who are intent on harming my lord be like Nabal. And let this gift, which your servant has brought to my lord, be given to the men who follow you. Please forgive your servant's presumption. The Lord your God will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my lord, because you fight the Lord's battles, and no wrongdoing will be found in you as long as you live. Even though someone is pursuing you to take your life, the life of my lord will be bound securely in the bundle of the living by the Lord your God. By the lives of your enemies he will hurl away as from the pocket of a sling. When the Lord has fulfilled for my Lord every good thing he promised concerning him and has appointed him ruler over Israel, my Lord will not have on his conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed or having avenged himself. And when the Lord your God has brought my Lord success, remember your servant." David said to Abigail, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you today to meet me. May you be blessed for your good judgment and for keeping me from bloodshed this day and from avenging myself with my own hands. Otherwise, as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, who has kept me from harming you, if you had not come quickly to meet me, not one male belonging to Nabal would have been left alive by daybreak." Then David accepted from her hand what she had brought him and said, "Go home in peace. I have heard your words and granted your request." When Abigail went to Nabal, he was in the house holding a banquet like that of a king. He was in high spirits and very drunk. So she told him nothing at all until daybreak. Then in the morning, when Nabal was sober, his wife told him all these things, and his heart failed him, and he became like a stone. About 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, "Praise be to the Lord, who has upheld my cause against Nabal for treating me with contempt. He has kept his servant from doing wrong and has brought Nabal's wrongdoing down on his own head." Then David sent word to Abigail, asking her to become his wife. His servants went to Carmel and said to Abigail, "David has sent us to you to take you to become his wife." She bowed down with her face to the ground and said, "I am your servant and am ready to serve you and wash the feet of my Lord's servants." Abigail quickly got on a donkey and, attended by her 5 female servants, went with David's messengers and became his wife. David had also married Ahinoam of Jezreel, and they both were his wives. But Saul had given his daughter Michal, David's wife, to Paltiel, son of Laish, who was from Galim. This is the word of the Lord.
Well done, Michelle. Thank you. Well, have you ever used the phrase, "never meet your heroes"? Ever used that phrase, "never meet your heroes"? It's a phrase that speaks to the way that your impression of someone can change. You see someone from a distance or someone for a short period of time and they look amazing. They look successful and confident and compelling and interesting. And your impression is that this person, whoever it might be, that they're so much better than you or me. They're someone to look up to. They're someone to learn from. And you think that, if you were close to them, if you followed them, if you followed their way of life, that would make your life so much better. But, as the saying goes, then you meet them. And as you spend time with them, as you see that person up close, your impression of them changes. As you spend time with that person, they don't look so amazing anymore. They're actually not better than you. They're just people. And they're facing the same challenges and they're failing as they face them just as often as you, just like you and me. And one of the original sources of this phrase, "never meet your heroes," was from the French writer Gustave Flaubert. He put it this way in his novel Madame Bovary. He said, "Don't touch your idols. A little gold always rubs off." And in 1 Samuel, David has emerged for us as something of a hero. He's the man who will be king of Israel. He's demonstrated the qualities of a king, especially compared with the current king Saul. And in chapter 24, the chapter just before this, the chapter we were looking at last week, even Saul knows that David is better, more righteous, Even Saul knows that David will be the king of Israel, and it's only a matter of time. But then in our passage today, we have a never meet your heroes moment with David, the future king of Israel. A man named Nabal pushes David's buttons and all the gold rubs off. Now we'll look at this passage under 3 headings. First, this is no hero. Second, helping a hero. And third, holding on to a better hero. So first, this is no hero. And this is no hero is the conclusion that Nabal comes to about David. And it's also the conclusion we can come to about David as we see his response to Nabal, which is what we see. But we don't see that straight away. What we see of David at the start of the passage is something more like what we'd expect of David, something that fits with the David that we've seen previously. Because we find David protecting the sheep of his fellow Israelite. After Samuel's death, this is what we read at the end of verse 1. Then David moved down into the desert of Paran. So that's where we are. But then a lot happens while he's there. It appears that David, you can see it in the middle there, the wilderness of Maon, and then the couple of places we're looking at today in Carmel and Maon, that's kind of the territory we're in. And that's where David spent some time with his men. And we find out that while David and his men have been there, have been in that region, that wilderness, that desert, they've been protecting the sheep and the shepherds of this man named Nabal. As we're introduced to Nabal, we're told a couple of things about him. We're told that he's very wealthy. He has 1,000 goats and 3,000 sheep, and he has property at Carmel. Wealthy, incredibly wealthy. But we're told that Nabal has let his shepherds take his sheep out into the wilderness. And what the passage makes clear is that this is a risky move. If you want your sheep to be safe, to survive, if you want your sheep not to be stolen or slaughtered, then you don't let them go out into the wilderness, or not alone at least. But then we skip some time and we pick things up at sheep shearing time, after Nabal's sheep have been in the wilderness for the season. And as we come back to Nabal, it's a time of great celebration because all 3,000 of his sheep have come back. And so it's obvious his wealth will only increase as he shears them. This is a time of celebration for him, for his household. And then David sends his messengers to Nabal, and we find out why all 3,000 of his sheep have come back, because David and his men have protected them. This is verse 4. While David was in the wilderness, he heard that Nabal was shearing sheep. So he sent 10 young men and said to them, "Go up to Nabal at Carmel and greet him in my name. Say to him, 'Long life to you, good health to you and your household, and good health to all that is yours.' Now I hear that it is sheep shearing time. When your shepherds were with us, we did not mistreat them, and the whole time they were at Carmel, nothing of theirs was missing. Ask your servants, and they will tell you. Therefore be favourable toward my men, since we come at a festive time. Please give your servants and your son David whatever you can find for them." This sounds like a very reasonable request, doesn't it? The time's come for Nabal to benefit from what David and his men have done. Now that it's time to shear the sheep, David asks for a share of the benefit, whatever Nabal is willing to give them. But Nabal isn't interested in giving them anything. He dismisses David's request and he insults David in the process. When Nabal hears from David, he doesn't see him as a hero, a protector. He sees David as just another rebellious bandit in the wilderness. Verse 10, Nabal answered David's servants, "Who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse? Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days. Why should I take my bread and water and the meat I have slaughtered for my shearers and give it to men coming from who knows where?" Now, the rest of the passage shows us that Nabal is in the wrong. David knows it, Nabal's wife Abigail knows it, and God proves it by putting Nabal to death for his wrongdoing. Because what we see is that Nabal knows David's name. This isn't ignorance. He knows who David is because he knows that he's the son of Jesse. David is a known person. And Nabal could have easily checked the facts about what David had done for him. But Nabal isn't interested in checking. He doesn't care if it's true because he's decided that David's not worthy of recognition or gratitude or the right to any payment for what his men might have done. And that's Nabal's response to David. But in David's response then to Nabal, we see that it's David who is no hero. And David's men return and report every word that Nabal said, and David doesn't ignore the insult. He doesn't let Nabal's lack of recognition or gratitude or payment go unpunished. In verse 13, David says to his men, "Each of you strap on your sword." And they do. And David and 400 of his men go up to Carmel to deal with Nabal. And David's intentions are made clear by what he says on the way to Carmel. In verse 21, David says, "It's been useless. All my watching over this fellow's property in the wilderness so that nothing of his was missing. He has paid me back evil for good. May God deal with David, be it ever so severely, if by morning I leave alive one male of all who belong to him." And we hear these angry, vengeful words, and we can't help but wonder, is this the same David? Is this the same David who spared Saul's life? Who spared the life of the man who was trying to kill him? A chapter ago, David let Saul go. And David said to Saul, "May the Lord avenge the wrongs you have done to me, but my hand will not touch you." Then he looked like a hero. But now, David's no hero. He's prepared his men for a massacre, and he's promising to kill a man and his whole household for disrespecting him, for not giving him and his men what they deserve. And it's just so different, so disappointing, so distressing. This is why you don't meet your heroes. And it's a shocking thing to realise, but David's response to Nabal is just like Saul. It was only a couple of chapters ago in chapter 22 that Saul did something similar. Saul thought a priest was disrespecting him by doing good to David. And so what did Saul order his men to do? He ordered his men to kill 85 priests, to put to the sword the whole town that they lived in. Men, women, children, infants, cattle, donkeys, sheep, everything. That's what Saul did. And so David prepares and promises to do personally the same kind of thing to Nabal and his household. We must admit that this is no hero. As we think about our lives, we probably don't see ourselves as heroes, but I wonder how much we want to avoid being found out. How much we want to keep people at a distance, to keep people from seeing what we're really like up close. How much we want to avoid someone having a never meet your heroes moment with us. Well, it's great news that even though we might be surprised by each other, God's never surprised by us. And it's great news that he sent Jesus because he knows what we're really like, even if nobody else does. And that helps us to be honest with God about what we're really like and honest with each other about what we're really like. And this brings us to our second point, help for a hero. And one of the attributes that we usually associate with heroes is that they help others. They help people who need help. They help people who are helpless. And because of this, it goes against what it means to be a hero, to need help. But help is what God sends to David. He sends Abigail. While this has been happening between David and Nabal, Nabal's wife Abigail has been elsewhere, and she knows nothing about what's gone on. She knows nothing about the protection of David's men or David's request or Nabal's response. And she doesn't know about the retribution from David that is coming. But one of Nabal's servants has seen everything and sees the urgency of the situation. And he fills Abigail in and calls her to do something because Nabal will not. This servant says to Abigail in verse 17, "Now think it over and see what you can do, because disaster is hanging over our master and his whole household. He is such a wicked man that no one can talk to him." Now, after hearing the servant's report, Abigail doesn't sit around and think about it. She recognizes the urgency of the situation. She recognizes that lives and livelihoods are on the line, and she is the only one who can stop it. So in verse 18, Abigail acted, and she acted quickly. Everything Abigail does in this passage happens quickly. And that's how she starts now. While her husband's preparing a feast in his own honor, Abigail's preparing a peace offering with David. And it's a massive peace offering because David is a serious threat. Quick as she can, Abigail loads up the donkeys with this mountain of produce. She rushes her servants out the gate with it, tells them to go on ahead, and she follows. And then in verse 20, Abigail rides her donkey into a mountain ravine and she sees David and his men. And we're told that David hasn't cooled off at all. He's just made his promise to wipe out all the men belonging to Nabal. And so Abigail again acts quickly. She does everything that her husband should have done, but didn't. In verse 25, Abigail asks that her words might replace the words of her husband because he is a fool, and his name means fool. I don't know what the parents were doing with that naming, but he's a fool. And then in verse 27, Abigail points to the gift that she's brought to David and his men, the gift that should have been given to them by her husband when the request was first made. And then Abigail goes on to give 3 reasons why David should relent from his revenge against Nabal. 3 reasons why he should leave Nabal's judgment to the Lord, just like he left Saul's judgment to the Lord. The first reason is that David will be king. Now, verse 28, "The Lord your God will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my Lord." Now, David won't just be king for one generation like Saul. He'll be a king whose descendants would rule Israel for generations. So who David is matters, and what David does matters. Because David is assured that his rule will have ripples for generations. That's the first reason. Second reason is that David's enemies will be dealt with. Verse 29, "Even though someone is pursuing you to take your life, the life of my Lord will be bound securely in the bundle of the living by the Lord your God. But the lives of your enemies he will hurl away as from the pocket of a sling." Now, as soon as we hear sling, this reminds us, likely reminded David of Goliath, of the day when Israel's great enemy, the Philistine champion, was killed by David with only a sling and a stone. And so that's what God says he will do to David's enemies. The way that God protected David then reminds David of how God will protect him now. And it also reminds us of the way that God had protected David from Saul already. Even when Saul is pursuing David to take his life, David can be assured that the way God dealt with his enemies would continue. Because God will deal with Saul and will deal with Nabal. And what we see by the end of the chapter is that God does exactly what Abigail said he would. David doesn't need to deal with Nabal because God will. In verse 36, Abigail finds foolish Nabal feasting like a king, very drunk. And if Abigail hadn't intervened, that's how David and his men would have found Nabal. But when Nabal sobers up enough to hear what's happened, his heart fails him and he becomes like a stone. And in verse 38, we read about 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal and he died. Just like Abigail said, God hurls David's enemy Nabal away as from the pocket of a sling, like a stone. But as we come back to Abigail's speech, we see that she gives a third reason for leaving Nabal's judgment to the Lord. Third, it's to protect David's conscience. In verse 30, she says, "When the Lord has fulfilled for my Lord every good thing he promised concerning him, and has appointed him ruler over Israel, my Lord will not have on his conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed or of having avenged himself." This is what God is doing through Abigail as she speaks with David. God is protecting David's conscience, protecting David's kingship even before it's begun, by preventing him from acting in anger against Nabal's household, to protect him from being burdened with that weight of guilt and wrongdoing. Now, Abigail's quick actions here can be instructive for us. They show us one way we can help each other as we seek to grow in Christ, as we seek to see every aspect of our lives transformed by Jesus. Because each of us can have blind spots when it comes to our sin, and the thoughts, words, and actions that we choose might seem right in our own minds. They might sound reasonable to us. They might be approved by the people around us, but be against what God has said in his word. And like Abigail, one of the things we can do for each other is to remind each other of the bigger picture. Remind each other of the bigger picture of who we are now. To remind each other that we are in Christ, that we've been given new life by him, life to live for him in a way that pleases him. And this is a life that won't be interrupted by death, but that continues into eternity. That's the protection that God has promised and provided for us in Jesus. So that's the reason we want to encourage one another, point each other to this bigger picture. Now, it feels like a risky thing to do, to remind each other of this bigger picture, to call each other to think about what we're doing, to call each other to repentance, possibly, just like it would have felt risky for Abigail. But we need to do it humbly, thoughtfully, prayerfully. We need to talk to each other and bring things up, not based on our own thoughts and opinions, but on what God has made clear in his word. And the result can be like what we see here. When David hears what Abigail says, he receives the help that she offers. He repents. He changes his mind about what he's going to do because he gets it. He gets that God has done this. He gets that through Abigail, he's been protected from disaster. In verse 32, David said to Abigail, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you today to meet me. May you be blessed for your good judgment and for keeping me from bloodshed this day and from avenging myself with my own hands. Otherwise, as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, who has kept me from harming you, if you had not come quickly to meet me, not one male belonging to Nabal would have been left alive by daybreak." That's what's at stake for David. That's what God has protected him from doing. In the same way, God can protect consciences. He can turn us away from sinful thoughts and words and actions. So that even now, while we struggle with sin, there'll be evidence of the people that God has called us to be, that God's Son has saved us to be, that God's Spirit enables us to be, as we encourage each other to live in ways that please Jesus. That will be in Jesus' eternal kingdom. Now, so far in this passage, it's been a case of never meet your heroes. We've seen that David is no hero as he prepared and promised to wipe out Nabal's household. We've seen God sending Abigail to help David, to help him make things right on Nabal's behalf. And by reminding David that God will make him king, will deal with David's enemies. But after seeing all that we have about David, it's still surprising to see the way that Abigail treats David, the way that she holds on to David, even after his never meet your heroes moment. And this brings us to our third point, holding on to a better hero. In 1 Samuel, we keep meeting people who show us what it looks like to treat David as king, even before that's a visible reality. And we probably saw it first with Saul's son Jonathan, and we see it again with Abigail. She treats David as king. Even before that's a visible reality. When Abigail meets David, he's an outlaw under a death sentence from the reigning king Saul. But look at how she treats David. In verse 23, when Abigail saw David, she quickly got off her donkey and bowed down before David with her face to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, "Pardon your servant, my lord, and let me speak to you. Hear what your servant has to say." Now, the way that Abigail treats David is just like David treated Saul in the previous chapter. She bows down to David with her face to the ground. She addresses David as "my lord," just as David did to Saul. And then at the end of her speech, at the end of verse 31, Abigail says this, "And when the Lord your God has brought my Lord success, remember your servant." In other words, when you're king, call me. And David doesn't wait that long to remember her. He doesn't even wait until he's king. He only waits until Nabal is dead. That's when David sends his servants to Carmel to take Abigail to be his wife. And Abigail again acts quickly. She doesn't sit around and think about it. Abigail follows through on what she'd said. In verse 41, she bowed down with her face to the ground and said, "I am your servant and am ready to serve you." Then she goes with David's messengers and becomes his wife. Now we have to remember that Abigail has seen a lot about David. After all that she's seen of David, after her never meet your heroes moment with David, when he was on a murderous rampage to kill her husband, why does Abigail choose to treat him as king? Why would she choose to make herself his servant? Why would she put her life in his hands? It's not because David's a hero, or because he won't need help again, or because he won't sin again. Abigail treats David as king because of what God has said about him. Abigail trusts in the promises of God about David. That's what leads her to hold on to him. To say to David, "I'm your servant now." To say to David, "I'm holding on to you when you're nothing more than an outlaw under a death sentence from the reigning king." To say that she will be his servant when he is the reigning king. She'll hold on to him then as well, just the same as she does now. Now, seeing Abigail hold on to David because of the promises of God, it's helpful for us. It reminds us that things are similar for us as we hold on to Jesus, as we serve Jesus, as we treat Jesus as king before it's a visible reality for us. People around us find it easy to dismiss Jesus based on what they see of him now. They treat Jesus like Nabal treated David. They say, "Who is this Jesus? Who is this Son of God? Why should I give anything to him?" But even though we don't see Jesus on the throne right now with our own eyes, like Abigail, we trust in what God has told us, that Jesus is the Christ, God's chosen king. And we hold on to Jesus and we serve Jesus because of what God has said about him and shown us about him in his word. But as we wrap up, it's helpful to remember that we can hold on to Jesus and serve Jesus with even greater confidence than Abigail with David. So after what she'd seen of David, it's just a waiting game for the next never meet your heroes moment. It's just a waiting game for the next person to push David's buttons like Nabal. But when we meet Jesus, we find he's the only person who won't disappoint us like that. Like Jesus did with his disciples, Jesus calls people to come near to him, to get to know him, to follow him. And like Jesus' disciples, the more we get to know him, the more we realize that there's no waiting game because Jesus never disappoints. Jesus never sins. Even when Jesus is disrespected, when he isn't given what he deserves, there's no sense of him seeking vengeance for himself. Even when he's under intense pressure, direct temptation, facing imminent death, there's no danger of Jesus diverting away from what God would have him do. And so as good as it was to see Abigail holding on to David, we're holding on to a better hero. A hero that never meets your heroes doesn't apply to. A hero that never disappoints. A hero who gives us great confidence that when we put our lives in his hands, when we keep trusting in Jesus, holding on to him, serving him as our king, he won't disappoint us. And so we can say to Jesus with confidence what Abigail said to David. And when the Lord your God has brought my Lord success, remember your servant. That day is coming soon. In response to what we've heard, we're going to sing together. And this song is our prayer, asking God to take our lives, to transform every part of our lives, that they might reflect the lordship, the kingship of Jesus. And so let's stand and sing and make this song our prayer.